session for this round of public information sessions. We will also reserve some time toward the end of the call to answer any questions you might have about other areas in the plan. To provide some context, on September 19th, staff members presented the first draft of a new student enrollment proposal to the Board of Education. This first draft includes proposed school assignment changes for the 2024-2025 school year. This proposal includes a recommendation for the base attendance area for the new Woods Creek Elementary School, which is scheduled to open in July of 2024, along with associated middle school changes to align the feeder pattern for the school. In addition, this year's student assignment proposal also includes base assignment changes, some calendar application changes, along with recommended stability rules. The additional base assignment and calendar application changes are being made to relieve capped and overcrowded schools, as well as to help better utilize our underutilized schools and to support transportation efficiency measures. These changes will provide our students an opportunity to attend less crowded schools and also, as I mentioned earlier, to have some more efficient bus routes. In addition, the board will also discuss options that will allow families affected by the proposal the opportunity to apply for a stability transfer, as I mentioned earlier, and remain at their current school without district transportation. The purpose of today's session is specifically to share information related to the recommendations for the Southeastern area, and as time permits, to provide opportunities for questions about other areas that are included in the plan, but our main focus will be the Southeastern area. We also want to make sure we have plenty of time to address your questions and answer those live today toward the end of the session, and I'll show you in a moment how you can participate and share those questions with us. Your feedback will be used along with all the other feedback we've received related to the first draft as we prepare the second draft of the proposal, and the second draft of the proposal is scheduled to be presented to the board on October 17th. Si necesita ayuda en español, por favor envíe un correo electrónico a studentassignment@wcpss.net y alguien se comunicará con usted mañana. As I mentioned, we're going to be able to take some questions from you live in today's session. So let's go over some logistics. The session will last for no more than an hour and a half. We will begin with the presentation and then conclude with a question and answer period responding to the questions that we received from today's session. You'll have two ways to be able to submit your questions. First is through the Thought Exchange. You may already be familiar with the Thought Exchange. You can use the QR code here or the join code that you see here to join in that Thought Exchange and post your questions here. The benefit of posting your questions in the Thought Exchange is that they're visible by all board members and our staff that are reviewing all of the comments so that they can be included in the analysis that's presented to the board on October 17th. To ensure that our staff today, our moderators and hosts, can recognize that your question is being posted live as part of today's session, if you'll use the hashtag session4 when posting your comment, that will help us grab that comment quickly and make sure that we're able to address it later in today's session. Additionally, we've turned on the question and answer feature in the Google Meet. And so with that question and answer feature, in order to access it, if you'll look at the bottom right of your screen if you're on a computer, and look for that triangle, square, and circle signal that's sort of highlighted in this graphic. If you'll click on that, it'll take you to another menu where you can click on a question mark. If, however, you're on a mobile device, what you'll want to do is click on the three dots, use those three dots to get you to another menu, which will show you those shapes, then that will lead you ultimately to this question mark. So really what you're trying to do is get to the question mark. Once you have that open, you can post a question. The way that we'll do the questions in the Q&A feature is once you see that your question has been removed, you'll know that it has been captured. We want to make sure that you can ask anonymous questions. And so in order to do that, we're going to protect your anonymity by not displaying those questions to the whole group here in the meeting itself, but we will capture every single question. So when you see that your question has been removed from the queue, then that's your notice that we've captured it, it's included, and we'll address it towards the end of the session. Again, we're working to get those questions anonymous, so I think our moderator is going to work on that to make sure that our questions remain anonymous.
Hi, Susan. I just want to add that board member Monica Johnson-Hausler joined as well.
Oh, welcome, Ms. Johnson-Hausler. Glad you could join us today. I will show this screen several times throughout the presentation, so if you're not quite ready to jump in and start asking questions, I'll remind you how to access this feature throughout the session. Before we jump into any of the recommendations about the plan that are included in the plan for this section of the county or for the Southeastern area, I do want to take a moment and walk through our policy that governs our student assignment planning processes, and that is policy 4150. It encourages and actually directs and guides staff to look at four main pillars: student achievement, stability, proximity, and operational efficiency when considering any type of assignment change. Now we're going to show you a brief video to help talk through what those four pillars mean and how staff uses those as guidance when developing assignment plans.
It's no secret that our school district is growing, and it's growing fast. That means each year we need to open new schools to stay ahead of the curve. To state the obvious, we have to fill these schools with students. And this can only be done through student assignment. Each year, some students are assigned to one of our new schools or reassigned to an existing school. This ensures we have balanced school populations across the district. We know families love their schools and that student assignment decisions can be worrisome. That's why we want to be completely transparent in how we make them. Our school board has established 4 pillars that guide each and every student assignment decision. Here's what they mean and how they work together. Student achievement. This is what we're all about as a school district. We know high concentrations of poverty or too many low-performing students in a school can hinder progress. This pillar compels us to think about whether a student assignment plan can help address some of those issues. Stability. Essentially, we try to keep as many children at their current school through the exit grade as possible. When reassignments are necessary, we provide the opportunity for some students to grandfather and stay at their current school through the exit grade. Operational efficiency. This pillar is about making sure all of our schools are at their best use. Overcrowded schools are a problem. Classrooms packed with too many students are one thing, but then there are the endless carpool lines, bathroom facilities that can't comfortably accommodate everyone, and having to start lunch when most people are still working on breakfast. On the flip side, having under-enrolled schools is an inefficient use of public resources, particularly when there are crowded schools nearby. Proximity. Okay, this one can be a little tricky. In a perfect world, houses would be built in neat little rows on a predictable timeline and at a slow and steady rate. As it is, we live in an imperfect world, where lots and lots of homes pop up in one area while growth is slight or non-existent in others. For this reason, it is impossible to send every child to their most proximate school, unless we wanted some of our schools bursting at the seams while others are half empty. That said, this pillar states that we will send students to schools within a reasonable distance. Often, the difference between the most proximate school and the next most proximate is no more than a couple of miles. Please remember that we must consider all 4 of these pillars when making assignment decisions. There is no priority among the 4 that applies in every situation. It's a balancing act that ultimately helps us come up with the best possible plan for everyone. Thank you for working with us to ensure our school system continues to serve all students well.
Hopefully that helped explain a little bit better detail how our policy on student assignment works and how those 4 pillars are considered by staff when making recommendations for the board. Okay, before we start walking through the specific recommendations for this area, we do want to take a moment and talk about a few factors that were impacting the development of the enrollment plan. So we'll share with you a little bit about the updates that were given to the board during the session on September 19th. We won't spend a lot of time on these updates simply because most of them all of them are on our website and have been shared publicly a couple of times, but I do want to just give you some context. It's really important for us to help you understand how we work through our process all the way from long-range forecasting in terms of the projected growth throughout the county based on what we get from our municipal partners in terms of recommended residential and commercial developments, what we know about birth rates and in-migration, and all types of demographic factors that help us to make projections on an annual basis as far out as 10 and 20 years. And we use that information as a starting point. Then we go through some public engagement processes where we really try to discern from the community what is important in their area for us to consider. And we continue to look at previous assignment plans and continued growth, capping, crowding, all of those sorts of things. So I'll talk you through a few of those pieces, but I just want you to know there's a long continuum that goes through this, and it is truly a multi-year planning process that looks many years into the future. It's just we bring assignment plans to the board 1 year at a time so that families can make decisions about how those affect their families 1 year at a time. Okay, so as far as the updates go, we'll start with the public engagement process. So as I mentioned, there was a long-range forecasting process that happens every year that sort of kickstarts and underlies this process. Information related to that long-range forecast is posted to our website in our future school section, as well as in the board materials. So if you are curious about all of those data sets, those are all readily available by visiting our enrollment proposal site. And so if you haven't yet visited enrollment proposal site, here is the link. I presume most of you have, because that's probably how you found the link for today's session, but there's a lot of information on this site. So if you are curious about all the different elements that go into the planning process, I would highly encourage you to spend some time navigating the resources that are available here. In addition, we have a frequently asked questions section on this part of our website specific to the first draft of the enrollment plan. So as we've been receiving questions through the thought exchange and through earlier virtual public information sessions, we've been updating that section, and we're looking to do a significant update tomorrow as well, since we've held 2 sessions this week. So please continue to revisit this site, and particularly the frequently asked questions section, so that you can see the answers to those common questions. We'll use the questions that you present today to update that section. And if for some reason we have more questions presented than we have time to answer, we'll address as many of those as possible through that frequently asked questions section of the website as well. So as I mentioned, for those of you who joined us a little bit earlier, I'll show you the screen a couple of times. This is the way to ask your questions during today's session. We highly encourage you to post them to the thought exchange using the hashtag session4. That way they're captured in the full set of public comments that will be shared with the board. This is the main public comment resource for the board. If you use the Q&A feature that's highlighted on the lower right portion of the screen, we'll still get to those questions in today's session, but they may or may not be included in that full set of information that's shared with the board on October 17th, as it won't be included with that thought exchange. But we certainly will use those to update the frequently asked questions, and we'll certainly use those to answer our questions live today. Some things that we did this year that were a little bit different is we recognize that we have new schools opening, several new schools opening over the next couple of years. We have Woods Creek Elementary scheduled to open in 2024-25, and then we have other schools scheduled to open in 25-26, a group of them, and then there'll be a few more opening in the years that follow that. So we took an approach where we went around and held sessions in these general areas, and the people that we invited were all of those that are in the impact area. So it could be people that won't be reassigned, but we wanted to make sure that they were aware we were having the conversation. Again, more information on who was invited is on our website. But what we did is we focused at the elementary school level. We invited families with kindergarten, first, and second grade students that were in the 2022-2023 school year, that grade. We invited them to the sessions. And then if they couldn't attend the session live, we also sent them links to thought exchanges. And for those participants that did respond and let us know that they were interested in participating in the discussion, we also asked if they wanted to participate in the follow-on focus groups. In these sessions that were in person, we started by asking the table groups, what are the most important things that district leadership should be aware of and take into consideration when managing enrollment and school crowding? This question was particularly poignant for these groups because we were focusing on the areas where new schools are going to open, and we wanted to make sure that we got input from the families in this area about what they thought the district should know about how they would like for us to manage enrollment, crowding, and growth. And what you can see here is a summary of all of the information that was collected across all of those sessions. More detailed reviews are also available on our website, and you can see those by following the links on that enrollment proposal site. However, what I kind of want to drive home is that we did notice that concepts like allowing for cohort continuity, or being able to start and finish at the same school, or even avoiding assignments to multiple schools for the same neighborhood. We're hopeful that you can see how this type of feedback that we received from the community early on has been taken into consideration with the recommendations that have been made this year. Another question that we asked these groups using a thought exchange was, what are the most important things that leadership should be aware of and take into consideration when opening a new school in your community? So for the areas that were impacted by these projected new school openings, we really wanted to dig in a little bit deeper and get feedback about their specific community, and these were extremely helpful. When we summarized all the comments, we determined that most of the comments fell into these 9 themes. And then just as an example, we were also able to look at them school by school and see what was top of mind for people as they were considering the opening of a new school in their specific community. So as an example, the Woods Creek Elementary site that's scheduled to open in 2024-25, proximity, transportation, and continuity were the 3 topics that were really top of mind for families impacted by the projected opening of this school. So again, I know I'm going a little fast. Most of this has been presented a couple of times to the board in June as well as again in September. So we do encourage that if you'd like to spend a little more time reviewing this, that you check out those resources on our website or recordings of those previous presentations, because I do want to get to your questions and answers. So I'm trying to get to the meat of the presentation as fast as I can. Another thing that we learned was that we still had some unanswered questions as a result of that engagement and those public engagement activities. So we decided to conduct some focus groups. As I mentioned just a few moments ago, the focus groups were invited from the group of parents that participated in the information sessions or that were invited to participate in the information sessions. So it still represented that basic region. So we'll talk through that in a moment. We also realized that based on that feedback, staff really needed to think about reviewing our stability rules. Is there any place where we could be a little bit more flexible and offer a little bit more stability for families as the stability rules are developed for the 24-25 enrollment proposal? And then really thinking about feeder patterns. We saw that that was a constant piece of information or piece of feedback that we were receiving from communities, was that keeping your students kind of together in a group would be important. So what did we learn from the focus groups? Well, we first started by posing 2 core sets of questions around cohort continuity and school calendar alignment. We did have a lot of families indicate in our public engagement activities that cohort continuity was important, and we wanted to really dig into that and make sure that we got a bit more of a depth of understanding on what that meant for families. And then we also heard little bits and bobs, and maybe not as much, about school calendar and school calendar alignment. So we know that that's important for families, and we really wanted to dig into some questions about that as well. We partnered with our data research and accountability department, and we hosted 3 sessions. I do want to say that focus groups are intentionally small. If you have, let's say, 12 participants, it starts to get a little bit full. So they are intended to be small. So we do want to always say that we're cautious with the results that we get from focus groups. They're intended to help us tease out some questions and get some really detailed feedback on a couple of items. But we do need to be careful that we don't broadly use the results to talk about everything across the entire district or every family in a particular region. But they do help us to get insight as staff. So the 3 core takeaways from these focus groups were, in respect to the cohort continuity piece, was keeping students together. That was really the core central theme that came out of that discussion. That in any case, when we were talking about this concept, families all sort of came together and coalesced around this idea that we need to keep students together as much as possible. Now, what keeping students together meant shifted a little bit from family to family. For some families, it meant if we're all in the same neighborhood, let us all go to the same school as an entire neighborhood. Try really hard, please, student assignment office, to not take our neighborhood and break it into pieces and send it to 2 different schools. Maybe it was about the calendar. For some families, keeping students together meant that if we're all on, let's say, track 3 together, we'd love to stay on track 3 as we move through our grades and into maybe middle school even. Or perhaps it's traditional calendar. You know, we want to all stay on traditional calendar together. And for other families, it was a more simplistic, traditional view, which is just, if we're all together in 5th grade, is it possible that we can all go to the same school for 6th grade? If we're all together in 8th grade, could we all possibly go to school together in the 9th grade? So we really heard that, and we digested that, and we're just using that as some additional feedback in our planning process. As you can see, parents really talked about this concept of keeping students together helps those bonds that are formed between, colleagues and classmates to support those students as they move through their academic career. The question that we asked related to calendar was twofold. One was, as we're looking at crowding and growth and enrollment growth in the district, for all the tools that we have in the toolkit, capping a school and sending new students to an overflow campus, reassigning students multiple times, to try to manage that growth on a rapid basis, or if possible, taking a traditional school and converting it to year-round, or maybe opening a school as year-round so there's additional capacity through that use of that calendar. And the group that we reviewed with really said that keeping the students at the school they're already at and perhaps changing it to a year-round calendar would be less disruptive than some of the other options. Again, we've got to be careful about how we use this information and that we don't use it broadly across the entire district, but it was an interesting aha for us as we were talking with families from these areas that represent these high growth areas in the county. And then the last question that we asked families was really around the concept of your students and their calendar across the grade spans. So you may be familiar with the fact that some of our elementary schools are multi-track year-round, some of our middle schools are multi-track year-round. Many of our elementary and middle and high schools are traditional. In fact, almost all of our high schools are on the traditional calendar. There's not a multi-track year-round high school. I'll just clear that up. But we do have a few that are following an early college sort of calendar or a modified calendar. So we posed the question to families, is it more important to have, particularly in a year-round situation, a K-8 calendar alignment or a 6-12 calendar alignment? So would you prefer that if you have a multi-track year-round elementary school that your students also go to a multi-track year-round middle school, so that if you have students across multiple grades, you can have that calendar continuity from across that grade span? Or is it better to say have that 6-12 calendar continuity and have traditional maybe starting as early as 6th grade and going all the way up to 12th? And really our results were inconclusive. It really varied by family situation and circumstance. So we really do need to keep asking questions about this concept and really continuing to tease this out as a district. What we learned from this is that it does really depend on your personal family circumstances, what works best for your family. So again, sort of telling the story, we start with some forecasting processes that tell us where growth is coming and where it's projected to come and how much growth we're going to have over at least a 10-year period, so that we can really be thinking long-term about our recommendations. So that's sort of an operational efficiency approach. Then we also did some in-person engagement with families and some thought exchange engagement with families throughout the spring to really try to get some information, particularly related to the opening of new schools. And then we also used that same sort of group to come back at them again and ask them if they participate in our focus groups. So there's lots of ways to engage, and we're going to continue our public engagement going into the spring. So it's an annual cycle for us. But now we're at the point where we're engaging in the public in response to our first draft release. So the draft was released on September 19th. Between September 19th and October 6th, which is tomorrow, our thought exchange will remain open so we can collect that feedback from families and then allow our staff time to evaluate those results, analyze those results, and prepare good recommendations for the board for their October 17th release of the second draft. Also, we've held virtual public information sessions, and so you are in our fourth and final session for this round. So thank you again for joining us, and we're going to get to those questions. So again, as we go through this session, if you do have questions, we want to make sure you're posting them to one of these two locations. I'll show this slide a whole bunch of times. I won't talk through it every time, but again, if you've just joined us, you can use the thought exchange and hashtag session4 to post a question, or you can use the Q&A feature right here in the Google Meet. Again, if you're on a computer, you want to look at that bottom right side of your screen to find that option. If you're on a mobile device, you're going to look for the 3 dots and then the shape, and ultimately you're looking for that question mark that says Q&A, and that's how you can post that question. All questions will be anonymous, but we will capture all of those questions. So again, if you're just joining us and you're posting a question to the Q&A section, when you see that it's been removed, that'll let you know that our staff has captured it, and we'll get to it when we get to the Q&A section for today's presentation. As we move forward, I just want to share with you a few more data elements that were shared with the board related to our sort of current status. So we do have schools across the district that are capped. There are 20 elementary schools across the district that are capped. In the Southeastern area specifically, none are capped yet, and that's a good thing. We're really trying to avoid that. But you can see here a list of all the schools across the county at the elementary level that are currently capped. And just as a reminder, if that's an unfamiliar term, it means these schools have reached a crowding level such that the board has worked with staff to develop an upper limit, a maximum number, a cap for the enrollment for that school. And once the school hits that number, the new students that move in afterward have to be assigned to a different school. Even though they've moved into the base for that school, they get an alternate assignment to a different school. They are placed on a wait list so that if there's any movement, they could potentially come back, but they're not allowed to go to the school that all kids in their neighborhood get to go to because there's not any room left. And so we're really trying to work hard to get this list shorter and shorter each year, but with the growth that we're experiencing, it has been a challenge. This then is a slide that's been shared with the board a number of times, and we wanted to share it with you, that talks about the crowding overall across the district. So not schools in the district are capped, but there are a lot of schools in the district that are currently over capacity. The red attendance areas that you see on this map represent elementary schools that have a projection of being over 110% crowded for the current school year. So that some of those are capped schools, many of them are capped schools. If you look at the orange attendance areas, those are schools that are projected to be between 100 and 110% crowding. So again, not great. We do want to watch these schools. Some of these are already capped, so we're keeping an eye on these campuses as well. Those that are highlighted in yellow are projected to be between 90 and 100% crowded for the year. And while ideally as a district, we love for our schools to be in that space, that's a great space for them to be operating in. If they're in a high growth area, that could mean that we're getting to that danger point where we might be getting ready to roll over that 100% mark. So we do want to watch these campuses as well. So crowding at the elementary level in particular is a great challenge for us, as you can see across the district. Cap schools also occur sometimes at our middle and high school levels, and so you can see here the schools across the district that are capped at the middle and high school levels. Same rules apply as I described earlier. And then here you can see a map of the projected crowding for all middle schools across the district. Again, the color palette's the same, so 110% or higher would be the red areas, 100 to 110 are the orange, and then 90 to 100 are the yellow. So the white spaces that you see would mean those schools are projected to be at or below 90% crowding for the current school year. And at the high school level, you can see there's also significant crowding concerns across the district. So that's a piece of information that staff has to take into consideration when we're thinking about operational efficiency and our assignment planning processes. Another thing we need to take into consideration is when and where are new schools coming. In addition, what you don't see on this list is monies that are being used to renovate campuses across the district. So our capital improvement plan has two major arms. One is developing and building new schools, as well as developing and renovating existing schools. And a lot of times when we renovate an existing school, we can expand the capacity at that campus. Not always, but a lot of times we can. And so staff at the student assignment level is mindful of what's going on in that capital improvement plan as we're thinking about what recommendations we need to make for the future. So as you can see in 2024-25, Woods Creek Elementary is scheduled to open, and you can see that rather lengthy list of all those new schools that are projected to open for 25-26. So we do want to be mindful of where those schools are located and whether or not they can help with some of our crowding concerns and our growth concerns. If you look out to 27, 28, and 30, 31, you can see there are a couple of additional schools that are projected to open in the out years. You may not know where all of these schools are located, so I want to show you a quick map. Woods Creek Elementary is located where you see that sort of reddish pink circle on the lower left-hand side of your screen. So that's that sort of southwestern corner or area of the district. The blue circles represent all the schools that are projected to open in 25, 26. So again, you can see they're sort of in that western and southwestern and southern area of the county. And then you can see here that Morseville High and the Pool Road Elementary site are scheduled to open in the out years, and those are the locations of those two campuses. I haven't said it yet, but I'll notice the asterisk that you see on all of these slides. Due to market volatilities, scope and schedule changes, and all things construction related, there is a chance that sometimes these schedules can change, so we just give you the most up-to-date information that we have. So as of the time of the presentation on the 19th, these were the dates that these schools were scheduled to open. Okay, so we've talked about long-range forecasts, we've talked about public engagement and community feedback, and we've talked about operational needs. So now it's ready to start talking about how that all comes together for this year's annual enrollment plan. As a reminder, if you'd like to post a question, please use the hashtag session4 and enter it into the thought exchange, or use the Q&A feature here within the Google Meet itself. Again, the questions in the Google Meet will be kept anonymous, but we will capture those questions and respond to them later in today's session. As we talk about the recommendations for base assignment changes, I want to quickly show you the whole district impact. We won't spend a lot of time here, but you can see all the schools at the elementary level that are projected to be impacted by this year's recommendations. And the map on the right gives you an idea of the distribution of these recommendations. At the middle school level, the same. I will say that this year's enrollment proposal for middle school changes, they are all specifically related to being complementary to the elementary recommendations. So the only middle school changes that are being recommended this year are complementary to the elementary to align feeder patterns or calendars. At the high school level, same thing, very few impacts for this year at the high school level, and they're all specifically related to elementary feeder pattern alignment based on the recommendations that are being made at the elementary level. And all of that was in response to the feedback from families about keeping cohorts together. Before we jump into the recommendations, we find that most of our families have a lot of questions about how does this impact me and my family. So we thought we'd jump into the stability rules for this area first and then talk through the recommendation. So this year, there are a couple of different sets of stability rules, but for all of the recommendations in the Southeastern area that are specifically related to Bryan Road, Aversboro, Rand, and Vance, all of the recommendations in this area would fall into this category, that it's a recommendation to go from an existing school to an existing school. So we're offering the most generous stability rules we can, which means if the student is already attending the school and they're scheduled to be reassigned, they would be eligible for a stability transfer and be able to remain at their current school. I think the largest majority of examples here would be students that are currently attending Bryan Road Elementary. So if you have a student kindergarten through 4th grade that's already attending Bryan Road that is in the proposal and recommended to be reassigned, they would be eligible for the stability transfer to be able to stay. In addition, if there's a rising kindergartner joining the family next year, that kindergartner could join your family as well and stay at your current school. The only downside, and we do understand that this can be a challenge for some families, is that district transportation would no longer be provided if you did elect to take that stability transfer. And so that's the only thing. You'll see a note at the bottom about the stability transfer window. When we release the draft 2 at the October 17th board work session, we'll give some more specific information about how the stability transfers will work, but they're generally late November to early December timeframe. We do a lot of communication with families so that they know how to access it, when to access it. We'll do direct messaging to you. We'll make sure your principals are aware. So we'll talk more about that on October 17th, but know that there'll be a lot of communication for those of you that are impacted. So if you want to take the stability transfer, we'll make sure we can make that happen for you. And I do want to clarify that if you do, if the plan goes through and your student is reassigned and you are interested in the stability transfer, as long as you put it in that official stability window, as I mentioned, late November, early December, it's guaranteed to be approved. If for some reason you wait and don't put one in at that time and you wait until the normal request for transfer window, which is usually late February, early March, we can't guarantee it at that time. It'll all be based on space availability and crowding at the school that you're requesting. So we do highly encourage families that are impacted that if you think you're going to want the stability transfer, to go ahead and ask for it in that time frame so that we can get it and guarantee it for you. And then if things change for your family and maybe you can't make carpool work, or you found out, oh, 2 of our best friends are going over to the other school or something like that, you can always ask for a return to base later on. But we'll talk more about that later if you have questions about it. So let's talk about the Southeastern area. I want to orient you to how the maps are set up. So the map on the left shows the current attendance area for the schools that we're going to be discussing. The colors represent different attendance areas. The hash marks that you see represent areas that are recommended to have a change in assignment, and the circles kind of just draw your attention to those areas. So the greenish, light greenish color that's on the left side of that first map, that represents the current attendance area for Vance Elementary. The more maroon, somewhat oval shape that's right next to it or just east of it represents the Rand Road Elementary base attendance area. The purple that kind of runs through the two sections of orange represents the existing Aversboro Elementary base attendance area. And then the two orange areas, the one that's kind of right there at that 540, 40, 70 mega intersection right there, as well as the section that's just below that section that's Rand, those represent the current Bryan Road attendance area. The recommendation is that the portion in the circle towards the top of the screen be assigned from Bryan Road to Aversboro, and we've had a lot of feedback about this particular recommendation, so I do anticipate we'll have lots of questions about this portion. In addition, as we go to the lower section, you'll see that that section, based on there's a creek in that area that sort of naturally divides the two groups. It would recommend that one group go to Rand and one group go to Vance. So the map on the right says if the board approves the plan as originally proposed, that would be what the new attendance areas would look like. In the full plan that's posted to the website and the addendum, there are some detailed maps that are PDF that you can zoom into and see street names and roads if you want to look at the map that way. We also have an address lookup tool on our website if you just want to type in your address if you're not quite sure if you're impacted. You can do that as well. This slide then shows what are the potential impacts from an operational efficiency standpoint, specifically from a facility utilization standpoint. So the chart that you see at the top, or the table that you see at the top, represents, if I look at the existing 2023-24 base attendance areas for these schools and we make no changes, then the crowding that you see on the right is the projected crowding for 24-25, and then again for 26-27. We also have some projections that go farther out, but we recognize they get less reliable, the farther out that you look. You'll also notice that we say capacity with trailers or utilization with trailers. That's just simply to indicate the maximum capacity for this campus. It is possible that one of the schools on this list doesn't have any trailers on its campus. And so what you'll see there for the capacity with trailers is simply the largest capacity for this school for the 24-25 school year, based on its current configuration and whether or not it has trailers. So as you can see, some of the schools in that top chart are well under that 90% mark that we talked about earlier, and some are well above that 110% mark that we discussed. So we do really want to try to balance out the enrollment for these schools and recognize that there is continued enrollment growth coming for the Bryan Road base attendance area over time. And so not only are we providing relief for the coming school year, but for future school years. What you'll see with the chart on the bottom where it says 2024-25 base school is if the plan goes up through as recommended in the original draft and every single student impacted accepts the new assignment, these would be the projected crowdings for the schools for next year and then a couple of years down the road. We recognize that based on the generous stability transfer rules that we've recommended, that the likelihood that the numbers would swing this quickly is very low, and that there would be a much more gradual impact on the campuses. And so this would allow a campus, particularly like Bryan Road, to more slowly get to a right size as the new developments are coming on that are going to come and backfill the campus. So families that are already at the school are welcome to stay at the school through the 5th grade and bring those younger siblings in with them, while we sort of more gradually adjust this attendance area for the school. We do recognize that losing transportation may provide some challenges for families. However, it is where we are in terms of being able to provide what we can for families on a consistent level. So again, I do want to caution, we recognize that change for Bryan Road looks very drastic, but these numbers in this original slide would be if every student who was projected to be reassigned took the new assignment in that first year, which we know will not happen. History shows us that many of our students will elect to use those stability transfers if the plan gets approved as recommended. All right, I'm going to show you the screen a couple more times, but again, if you've got questions or if you have a new question or if you've just joined us, if you've got a question for today that you'd like for me to answer later on, please use the thought exchange and hashtag session4. That way it gets included with all the public comments. If you would like to just use the Q&A feature in the Google Meet, that's fine too. You've got some directions there on the lower part of your screen on how to access that feature. Just know that those may or may not be included with all of the public comment if they don't match things that are already in the thought exchange. And again, if you're using the Q&A feature, we will continue to keep your thoughts confidential. So if you see your question has been removed, then that's your way of knowing that it's been captured by staff so that we can answer it in just a few minutes. We're getting close. In your area, there are also, in the Southeastern area, there are also recommendations related to calendar application changes. And so what I want to say here is we've had a history of oftentimes offering not only your base assignment, but a school at the same level with a different calendar. So you're based at a traditional elementary school and you're interested in the year-round calendar. We've often, or in history, we've been able to offer up a year-round school and also offer district transportation to that option. Our ability to continue to offer transportation to both a base and a calendar option is just slowly diminishing over time. And so while we're not saying that families can no longer ask for that other calendar, we certainly want families to do that if that will work for their family. We're just saying you'll need to use the regular transfer process to ask for it, and we won't be able to provide district transportation. So again, in a moment, I'm going to show you the slides. If you see an NA, all that means is that for that area, for that base attendance area, there wouldn't be a school that has the other calendar that comes with district provided transportation. You are still absolutely welcome to and encouraged to ask for a school of a different calendar if that's what meets your family's needs. Just know that you'll be responsible for providing transportation. And we'll talk through a couple of ways that you can do that. So I just want to be clear, when we see NA over in that right column, it simply means that, for example, if you're currently based at Creech Road Elementary and you've historically had transportation provided to year-round schools like Rand or Timber, over time that transportation will be removed. So let me talk you through this slide. On the left, it says your current base. So if you are currently living in the base attendance area for Creech Road, so you type your address in and it says Creech is your base. If you click over to the application list, you might today see either Rand or Timber Drive as a year-round calendar option that comes with district transportation. So you're noticing here for that Creech line that there's 2 asterisks beside Rand and 2 asterisks beside Timber or Stars. So what this means is that in this area, there are a number of families that are utilizing the transportation for these particular assignments, and we want to phase it out a little bit more gradually. So in this example, any existing student that's already attending Rand with transportation or an existing student that's already attending Timber Drive with transportation would be allowed to do so and keep that transportation through the 5th grade. And then new families would not be able to ask for that same level of transportation. So if a new family who's not already attending Rand or Timber Drive would be interested in doing that, they could use the transfer process and ask for it, but then they would need to provide their own transportation. If you'll notice, there are a handful in the right-hand column that have a single star. Although it's not in this area, you see the Alston Ridge just above Valentine. It says Alston Ridge, Green Hope, Hortons Creek, and then on the right it says Green Hope with a single asterisk or star. That means that in some cases, some addresses for a base attendance area may see a particular option, but maybe not all of them do. And all this means is if you see it today, you'll keep seeing it in the future. We just won't add it to any new addresses that don't already see it. So hopefully that helps you to understand and navigate the slides. There's a couple of slides here that talk about all the moves across the district. Again, all of this is posted to the website. So if you want to look at this a little bit more slowly, you're certainly welcome to do so, or use our address lookup tool for draft 1 to see how your personal address is impacted. You're welcome to do that. So if you use the online address lookup tool and you see the word none, that's this NA concept. It just means there's not an option that comes with district transportation, but you certainly are welcome to use the transfer process or the magnet application process, particularly if you're looking for traditional calendar, to ask for a school with a different calendar. Just a few more elementary schools that are included here. And then at the middle school, there's some recommendations that impact this Southeastern area. So again, if you're currently based at Leesville Road Middle, and you've got North Garner as an option, you would no longer have North Garner as an option. This is related to a different assignment change that's being recommended in the downtown area related to Leesville Road. So it shouldn't impact any families that are in the Garner area proper. We talked about the stability rules for this area already. I just want to take a moment and talk you through the other ones just so that you know, for the families that are impacted by the new Woods Creek, their recommendations are not quite as flexible or generous as the ones that we're recommending, particularly for the Bryan Road example or the calendar application changes that we just went through. So if you know anybody that's impacted by Woods Creek, do encourage them to check out the website because their rules are a little bit different, because when we're opening a new school, we need to make sure that a sufficient number of students join that new school in its first year so that we can operate the school and hire teachers and principals and counselors and all those things. There's another recommendation in the northwestern area of the county that's similar, and that it's a very significant change to the attendance area for the school. So we have similar recommendations for stability rules for that recommendation. However, again, I've got the README on this. This is particular to the Southeastern area. So for the Southeastern area, we have the most generous rules. And if I didn't clarify earlier, it doesn't only apply to the base recommendations, but it also applies to the calendar recommendations. So if for some reason you're losing transportation, but you still want to stay at the school, absolutely, you can do that. All right. I see that a handful of people maybe are trying to raise their hand. This session is designed for you to put your questions into the thought exchange or into the Q&A feature. And so we're going to get to those questions momentarily. I think we're finally at the end. Let me just do a quick peek. We're going to go through some timeline and next steps, and then we'll get to those questions. So I mentioned earlier that our next presentation to the board is October 17th. So here you'll see that. And then on November 8th, the board will hold a public hearing, and that is an in-person public hearing that's scheduled just specifically to hear comments about the enrollment proposal. Information about how to sign up for that public hearing will be shared closer to that date. So just continue to monitor our enrollment proposal website if you're interested in signing up to speak. November 21st, then, during the work session, after hearing that feedback, as well as any additional feedback we receive on the second draft, the board will be presented with a final draft of their enrollment proposal and be asked to approve that final draft during their meeting that same night. Again, this is where we are with our current public engagement process. And so now it is time for what you've all been waiting for, the question and answer period. I will say thank you so much to our host and moderator. They have been feverishly combing through the thought exchange and monitoring the Q&A feature to grab all of your questions, and we'll start answering them right away. I'm going to take a moment to get a drink of water, and then our host, Corrali, I think, is going to start presenting questions to you.
Oops, I forgot to mute myself. Unmute. First one, why was Oak Park cut out? How much impact does our neighborhood have on occupancy?
So Oak Park, I believe, is one of the neighborhoods in the area that's being recommended to be assigned from Bryan Road to Aversboro. And so areas along New Bethel Church Road that are contiguous with existing attendance areas to Aversboro were highlighted because of the number of students that are in these subdivisions. There's more than just one in that area, as well as the growth that's coming to future phases for some of these subdivisions, so that that growth could be absorbed by the available capacity at Aversboro. There are additional neighborhoods that are even closer to Bryan Road that are continuing to be built that will continue to populate and put pressure on that school. And so we recognize that this area is somewhat proximate to Bryan Road, if not more proximate to Bryan Road than Aversboro, yet Aversboro will be the closest school with available capacity in the long term to support families in this area. Again, we do recognize that there's a handful or a number of families in that particular area that are already attending Bryan Road. And so that's why we recommended those really generous stability rules, so that if families wanted to stay at Bryan Road that are already there, they'd be able to do so. We do recognize that as new families move in and take the option for their new school of Aversboro, that might create a little bit of a shuffle, but that would eventually work itself through over a number of years. But we just want to make sure families had all of those options available to them. But again, it's really because Aversboro is the most proximate school to those neighborhoods that will have available capacity long term.
How do I get the proposed stability transfer for my daughter at her base school, Bryan Road Elementary?
We'll give very, very specific details to every family that's impacted when we get through the enrollment process, but basically how it will work, I can give you the basic frame. The day that the board approves the plan, which would be November 21st, I think that's a Tuesday, we'll take our time to analyze everything, get all of our systems updated, and that's that week right before Thanksgiving. So that following Monday, we'll start sending messages out to families to let them know you've been impacted, you're eligible, here's a link. Right? So here's how you're going to do it. It'll be an online application process. So if you've used our request for magnet application process in the past, it's that same basic format. You'll create a parent account, you'll put in your request, and as long as you put your request in during that window, right now we're projecting sort of like a late November to early December 2-week period. As long as you get it in that window, it'll automatically be approved. So it'll be an online application is the short answer.
This question is about performance enrollment test scores at Aversboro. and this family is being moved from Bryan Road to Avisboro. And they want to know, can you share any data or research that supports the idea that the proposed changes will ultimately benefit the students and families?
Sure. So as was outlined for those of you who joined us early on, student achievement is one of our pillars, and we certainly look to that. I'll have to say that as a student assignment representative, my responsibility is to think about how we're balancing our schools and how we're making sure we're operationally using all of our facility space and preparing for long-term growth. When we're talking about individual academics, we absolutely know that all of our schools in the district are wonderful. And I know that those of you that are already in an existing school have a lot of allegiance and comfort with the staff that is there and with the programs that are there. Again, that's why we really recommended those generous stability rules so that you could make a decision that was best for your family during this transition period. But as far as academic concerns go, I'd really direct those to principals. They're all offering the state and district curriculum, and they're all supported by their area superintendents who do a really good job. And so all of that is really individualized as you approach the school. So the data that we're using is to show first operational efficiency, of course, but as I talked about with student achievement, is to really look at how we're creating a balanced approach to enrolling students across all of our schools.
Why not grandfather existing neighborhoods in and send new neighborhoods to a new school?
Thank you for that question. And I think just so you know, for us, when you use the word grandfather, we use the word stability. So we'll use those interchangeably, but we've shifted to using the term stability because it's really a more appropriate definition of what we're doing. We're providing a stable school assignment for your family. Just so you know that if you are more familiar with the other term, for us, it can kind of be used interchangeably. And so essentially that's what we have offered, right? So the residents that are in an existing neighborhood that are already attending a school, we've offered those generous stability rules to allow students who are already attending the school to go ahead and continue attending the school. But you're correct. The new residents that move into the neighborhood later would be assigned to the new school. Part of the reason why we can't leave an existing neighborhood in a particular school is because at some point it creates, I don't know how to describe it, but it's sort of like a hopscotch approach. And so we really do want to honor that proximity arm of our attendance policy. And so there are neighborhoods that are being developed in the Bryan Road base attendance area that are even closer to the school than the neighborhoods that are being recommended to go to either Avisboro, Rand, or Vance. And so it's really about that long-term, long-range look at proximity and stability over time.
What is the long-term plan for this area with all the forecasted growth?
Sure. So right now, with all the forecasted growth, the recommendations that we're making in this year's enrollment proposal, we feel confident will give, I say bias, but give us a good at least 10-year window to be able to absorb the growth at Bryan Road Elementary and be able to manage the growth using Avisboro and Rand. I do want you to notice, I sort of glossed over, but Vance Road is going to potentially be a little bit crowded if all of the students in that area move. There is a school just to the west of that campus near Banks Road Elementary called Hilltop Needmore that is currently under construction and projected to open for the 25-26 school year. So the growth that we're seeing along 42 and in that portion of the base attendance areas that we're discussing tonight, that will be redirected toward that. We'll use that new campus to help provide relief there. But for Bryan Road, we feel pretty confident that with the forecasts that we're seeing and the approved residential developments that we're seeing, that the recommendations we make this year will give sufficient relief to the campus to be able to sustain its growth over the next 7 to 10 years.
How often are meaningful revisions made to the draft between versions?
Thank you for that question, because it's a very genuine question. And I will say regularly, each year as we review the thoughts and comments from the exchange, if there's anything that has been brought to staff's attention that wasn't already available to us when we did our initial research and planning, we absolutely will make recommended revisions and share those with the board. In addition, as the board reviews the feedback, if they feel that there's something they'd like staff to do differently, they can direct staff to make adjustments, when we're talking about things through the work session. So quite regularly, I haven't seen a year yet where there hasn't been at least, 1, 2, 3, 4 revisions between the first draft and the final draft. So it is quite common that revisions are made.
Why are you opposed to capping Bryan Road?
Great question. As a school assignment or student assignment staff and thinking about operational efficiency, I think what is not as well understood by the public is the instability that capping creates, not only for families, but for district operations. So just to put some context on it, if a school is capped, certainly that means the existing families and the existing students that are already in the school get to remain in the school and keep their transportation. And for those families, it feels very stable and it's not disruptive. But for any new families that move into that same attendance area, they then get sent to a completely different school that's generally a little bit further away on a different bus route. And they may or may not be able to, be called back off of the wait list to come to that CAP school. So you have a couple of pieces of instability there. Families that are new to the community don't get to go to the community school. And as I mentioned, we heard very clearly that neighborhoods, families want the whole neighborhood to go to the same school. So in this case, you're actually splintering neighborhoods. Second, that operational efficiency piece on the transportation side becomes a bit of a challenge because now we have to send 2 different routes worth of buses into the same neighborhood to take students to 2 different schools. In addition, the school that receives those students as an overflow campus, they're constantly managing all of that new growth and all of those new students coming in, starting to develop relationships with them, and then if they can get called back. So there's some instability for the families for both schools. So while there is a win for those families that are already at the school, the new families, the new routes, the overflow school that has to receive those students, there's just so much instability for all of those parts of the puzzle. And so it's not a feasible long-term solution for managing growth in the district. It's intended to be temporary.
You've already touched on this a little bit when you were presenting, but why not expand Bryan Road or build another school to serve our neighborhoods?
Great question. So if you'll think about what I shared with the capital improvement plan, our capital improvement dollars are limited and they've already been earmarked for other projects in higher growth areas that have no other options. So the difference for the Bryan Road campus to some of the other campuses that we're talking about is there is available capacity nearby to absorb some of the growth that's in the existing attendance area for Bryan Road. In other regions of the county, there aren't such options available. There's not an existing capacity in existing schools to absorb that growth because it's new growth and it's expansion. So where that occurs, we really do have to site and select and build new schools. As I mentioned, the forecasts that we work with are at least 10 years out. Sometimes we try to stretch them to 20, but we know that the reliability gets less and less as you get farther away from the current date. But we use those projections to do our site selections, and they're pretty spot on. If you'll recognize, most of the schools that we're opening in the next couple of years are in areas where there are a number of capped and overcrowded schools because we knew that that growth was coming 10 years ago. So sometimes it's related to limited funding. Sometimes it's related to the fact that there is available capacity in the area. So that's the case for Bryan Road. There's sufficient capacity to absorb this growth without having to build a new school. And then as far as adding and expanding capacity to an existing campus, there's a lot of regulations that I'm unfamiliar with this particular campus, but in some cases we can't physically do it because the permitting won't allow us to add capacity to certain campuses. And also there's limited dollars for those types of projects as well. So it's a combination of limited dollars, higher need, and making best use of the resources we already have available to us.
Okay. At what point do the town, Garner, and WCPSS talk when planning new developments?
So you may not be familiar, but in the state of North Carolina, and particularly, of course, for Wake County, because that's where we live, there aren't specific guidelines or rules that towns or municipalities have to support the construction or development of schools. So that's a completely independent function from the towns and municipalities. The county commissioners help us provide funding at the county level for our school projects, and then the Board of Education at the county level works to try to partner with those municipalities to know where the growth is coming, know when it's coming, and be able to try to site select as we can. We really try to partner as best we can. As I mentioned, when we do the long range forecast, we really get all of that data data from our municipal and town planners and partners and all of that process. We're actually engaging in that process right now. As I mentioned, it's an annual process going around saying, hey, what's being approved, what's being developed, what's switching from commercial to residential, what's going to change from high density to low density to high density, a lot of planning terms. So we get all of that information, and then our forecast team really works to develop that long range forecast based on all of those approvals. The only sort of point of friction is that sometimes all of those projections are coming in areas where we as a school board can't find or identify suitable land to construct a school. And so when that happens, we have to start working really hard and getting creative about where we can find school sites. So in this case, we have been partnering with the town of Garner. We know the growth is coming, and Bryan Road's just starting to go a little faster than we need it to. And so we need to provide this relief now versus waiting.
Okay. Was changing the calendar considered to increase capacity? Why can't Bryan Road Elementary have a year-round calendar to deal with the crowding rather than reassigning Magnolia Park and Oak Park students to Avisboro?
That is a wonderful question, and a lot of times calendar is based on community feedback as well as facility utilization needs. And so I can certainly take that question and that idea, and staff would be happy to evaluate the impact of that and determine whether or not that would be a suitable way forward for the use of Bryan Road. But we hadn't, in our initial proposal, recommended a change because at this time it didn't seem it would be supported by the community, but we certainly can evaluate that.
Reassignment was discussed last year for Bryan Road, and Oak Park / Magnolia Park was not slated for reassignment. What has changed? Why prioritize forthcoming developments over established families and neighborhoods? The last one you answered previously.
So I feel like I've addressed this, but I'll make sure I'm tackling it. So the question is really about why didn't we make this recommendation for these neighborhoods last year? Is that kind of the crux of it? So last year when we made the initial recommendations, we were hoping to wait until the opening of Hilltop Needmore to be able to do all of the changes at one time. However, there's been a slight delay in the opening of Hilltop Needmore, so it's not going to open until 25-26. So when we did our original planning for last year, there was an idea that Hilltop might open in 24-25, but then it was shifted to 25-26. And so with all of those delays, we didn't feel the Bryan Road, as you can see by the crowding slides, it can't sustain the current rate of growth that it's experiencing today and will continue to experience as the additional developments are growing to delay any longer. And so we had looked at these areas previously. We were, just waiting till the right time to provide that relief for Bryan Road. And unfortunately, the recommendation does come this year.
It looks like Garner Middle Schools will be at capacity soon. Why was the Bryan Road Middle School put on hold? It looks like it will be needed.
Great question. So there, some of you may be familiar that at Bryan Road Elementary, there's additional land that was acquired during that purchase that we could potentially put a middle school on that site. That campus is still under discussion, looking at the projections long term. At the moment, the needs in the Morrisville area prioritized Parkside Middle School ahead. So that's the only middle school that's projected to open in this current capital improvement plan. So as we're starting to look forward into the out years, we will be looking to see where we might need to, when we might need to use that facility. So yes, it is still under discussion. The capital improvement team and the planning team is still looking at that site along with others across the district. So it's it will come soon, someday. I just can't tell you when based on funding and other priority needs across the district, but it is still on the table. It's still being discussed. I just don't have a projected date for construction for that particular project yet.
This is the stability clarification.
Sure.
What are the criteria taken into consideration when reviewing a stability transfer, and what percentage of stability transfers are approved?
Okay. I thought I was clear on this, but let's be super, super clear. If you're eligible for a stability transfer, so let's use an example here. I've heard some families use terms like Oak Park and maybe Magnolia. So let's say I live in that neighborhood and my student's currently attending Bryan Road and the plan gets approved as it's currently proposed. Any of those students would be eligible for stability. So what we do on our side is through our information systems processing, we identify all the students that are eligible. We'll send a communication to you when you fill out the request. The only criteria that's evaluated is, are you an existing student at the school that's impacted by reassignment? And so at that point, we approve it and it's guaranteed. So all of them are approved. I do want to make sure that I'm super clear to you, and I've said this a couple of times, as long as the request is submitting during the designated window, and we will communicate with you 4 and 5 and 6 times. You'll be sick of getting our emails, but we will share with you multiple times. Here's how to put in the request. Here's the window for putting in the request. Please put in the request. And so as long as you put it in that window, it's guaranteed.
I understand proximity and bus routes are considered with reassignment, but is congestion on surrounding highways considered? Highway 50 is already so busy and cannot handle current traffic.
The short answer is yes, of course. We look at all of the different factors as possible, that we can as we're overlaying all of the recommendations. So we do look at existing transportation networks. We do look at existing transportation data. And as was mentioned in the video at the beginning, we do have to balance all of them. And so very rarely do we have a situation where all of the factors can be perfectly balanced and it's just a nice, easy change in school assignment. And I don't mean to belittle that, but it's just very, very hard to get all of those factors to balance together. So we do our absolute best to balance as many as we possibly can in our recommendations. So we do recognize that for some students, the bus route might be longer, but it still would potentially be efficient in the sense that all the students from the same neighborhood are getting on that bus and going to school together. So there's a sort of 2 different ways to look at that. But we do understand that and we recognize that.
I have 2 children currently at Bryan Road who are soon to go to Vance. If I ask for a transfer and it's granted, what happens to my son who won't start kindergarten until the 25-26 school year?
Great question. So in the year that a plan is approved, the stability rules are specifically for these students at this time for right now, and we take care of those. In future years, our general transfer rules say that any rising kindergarten student that wants to join their existing older sibling, those are automatic, those are guaranteed, or we can automatically as staff approve those. You just won't request it during the stability window because at that point you're not being reassigned in that year. You'll request it during the normal request for transfer period. So our standing rules are if a rising kindergarten student wants to join their older sibling, they absolutely can. They just need to be in school at the same time. Again, you just won't use the stability transfer window to request that. You'll use the more traditional February, March timeframe transfer window to ask for that. Same goes for middle school and high school. So if anybody has any reassignments happening at that level or concerns about that in the future.
If this proposal was in the works since the past 2 years, why were the communities being built around that time not informed about it? Why was it not posted anywhere by WCPSS so people buying houses and moving here could make an informed decision?
That's a difficult question to answer in the sense that towns and municipalities are the ones that are in charge of approving residential developments, which is a slightly different question. So that's a different piece from us. As far as what's in the works, we do reach out as often as we can to receive feedback about potential and recommended changes. So when we did make recommendations last year, there were conversations about it, but specifically going into individual neighborhoods and saying that you might potentially be a reassigned, you are correct. That did not specifically happen in that way. And we can take that feedback into consideration for future enrollment plans. And I hear that and understand that question and concern.
What changes are expected in draft 2?
I will be candid, it's a little too early. We've been running virtual public information sessions for the last 2 weeks and culling through the thought exchange. So next week we'll start doing our really deep dive analysis of all that information as we prepare our final recommendation. So it's a little too soon for me to be able to tell you anything specific because the planning team is still really culling through and evaluating all of the feedback that we've been receiving because it's a lot. I mean, it's been great. We've had a lot of great engagement, but we do need to sit down and continue combing through all of that. So it'll be closer to the board work session date before any final recommendations or revisions are prepared and ready for the board to review. So it'll be October 17th when we'll all know.
Susan, I can't remember if you said how long the window is for stability transfer,
Sure.
But this person is asking.
Sure. What we'll do is it'll be at least 2 weeks, 2 calendar weeks, so not 10 days, but like 14 days. And then usually we build in a buffer for a couple of days if we have to extend it just to make sure we catch all of our families, but it'll be no less than 2 calendar weeks. And we'll message you multiple times to remind you during that period. I do want to just pause for a moment. I know this was also a general overview question. Were there any questions from any other areas? We can kind of bounce back and forth. So I want to make sure that if anybody had a question from a different area, that we get those addressed, a handful of those as well.
Here's one from a different area. One portion of the community has been assigned to Apex Friendship Middle and the other part assigned to Apex Middle. Can our entire community be assigned to Apex Friendship Middle?
I will say in this year's enrollment plan, any recommendations that would take areas and assign them that from a non-CAP school into a CAP school would not be considered, but we certainly can look at those long term as other developments happen in areas. But I will say staff would not recommend adding any assignment areas to an existing CAP school at this moment. And if you're not familiar, Apex Friendship Middle is capped and is what I call actively capping. Students who move into that attendance area can't go to the school. So in this year's plan, we would not make that type of recommendation, but we certainly are happy to evaluate that over the years if anything changes in that area. Because again, we do want to try to keep neighborhoods together where we can, but just there's a very precarious and predictable, very specific capping situation happening at that school where we couldn't recommend adding additional base attendance areas to the campus at this time.
We are currently 0.9 miles from Bryan Road and 4 miles from Avisboro. Also, there is a community which are building new homes and still assigned to Bryan Road, where Magnolia Park and Oak Park are singled out. Any reason? How is the zoning justified when we're not going to the nearest and best school in the vicinity?
I think we've addressed this a couple times, but it's the difficult situation where because of the way that housing developments are built and where the schools are located, we cannot always guarantee that we can assign families to their closest school. So we try really hard when we have to make that type of adjustment to assign you to the closest school with available capacity. So in this case, Avisboro is the closest school to these communities with available capacity long-term to support the enrollment that comes from these neighborhoods, as well as the growth that's coming from the continued development in the neighborhoods. But we do recognize it's not the closest school, and that happens on occasion throughout the district.
Would reassigning the section near Little Creek offer enough relief for Bryan Road for the next school year?
So I believe we're referring to the section that's the lower section that maybe it's closer to 42. Certainly, if we focus just on that, that would provide a modicum of relief for a year, but it certainly wouldn't provide the long-term relief that's needed for the campus over time. And we do recognize, as someone else mentioned in an earlier question, we did make an adjustment to the attendance area last year to provide some relief. We're coming back again this year to provide additional relief. We don't want to come back another year later and do it again. So we really do recognize that this can be destabilizing for families. And so at this point, this would be the solid set of recommendations that would set Bryan Road up to be able to sustain its growth over time.
Our families are very interested in stability, Susan. What happens if a lot of stability transfers come in? Does it lead to a cap or denial of transfer requests? Stability requests, I mean.
Yeah, no, we're prepared for being able to approve all of those stability requests that come in. We recognize this will create a little bit of, if every single student who's eligible to put in a stability transfer does, it certainly will keep Bryan a little extra full for a year or two longer, but we're confident that the school can absorb that for the short period while providing that stability for families. For us, really responding to the feedback of families about stability, staying at the school where you started, that cohort continuity piece. In this case, we felt like we could honor that with the really generous stability rules. So I do want to say again, as long as you put the request in during the official window. If you miss the official window or choose not to put it in the official window and come back later, at that point, I can't guarantee that we would approve it. At that point, we would have to look at space availability before approving any additional transfers. So as long as you put it in during the designated window, we'll take care of you.
And another question was if they have to repeat it every year.
Oh, great question. We get that quite a lot. The way that transfers work in Wake County is if you put in your transfer request and it's approved, it is valid through what we call the terminal grade. So in this example, it would be through the 5th grade. If it's at a different grade level, 8th grade, or 12th grade. So no, you do not have to resubmit the request each year. In fact, it's such a strong transfer, for lack of a better description, that if you move out of the area, technically that's still your school assignment. And let's say you move from the Garner area to the Wake Forest area, you would actually need to put in a request to undo the transfer to be able to go to the school in the Wake Forest area. So those transfer, as long as you're a Wake County resident, let's be careful, don't go moving across the Johnson County line. But as long as you're a Wake County resident, those transfers will be honored through the 5th grade. And you will not have to repeat them every year.
This is a question outside of the southern area.
Okay.
Stanley Martin West Village community members had sent an email asking why we were assigned to Apex Middle High supported with data points. Can you please look into that?
I think I understand the question, and the answer is we are. On occasion, we do get requests to be, for people who want to be reassigned, and we do evaluate those. As I mentioned in an earlier comment, in the Apex Middle, Apex Friendship Middle, Apex High, Apex Friendship High area, we do have to be very cautious right now because we have a lot of CAP schools in that area. So this year's proposal will not have any recommendations that would include moving students into a CAP school or really in any of those schools. As a note, I mentioned it very briefly, there's a high school that's going to open in the 25-26 school year, Felton Grove High School, that will also impact that sort of western or southwestern region along the US 1 and 64 corridor area. So we are holding off on any recommendations for that area as staff until we get a better feel for what the impact of that school will be as well. So again, this year we couldn't take up any recommendations that involve CAP schools or assigning students into CAP schools, and we won't, but we are evaluating all of those long-term for future potential inclusion and other enrollment proposals.
Can Apex residents get preference to Apex schools over Holly Springs / New Hill residents considering proximity to school?
As I mentioned, I'm not sure if you were here or part of the call when I talked about how our county is set up. We are a county system of schools. We're not municipal based. So our schools are not designed specifically to serve a municipal area or fit within a municipal boundary. So our attendance areas are really reflective of where the growth exists, where we can assign. We've mentioned this a number of times in relation to the Bryan Road piece about sending you to the closest school that has available capacity, also balancing the other factors that we have in our policy about student achievement and all of those kinds of factors. So we do not use municipal boundaries to determine which students go to which schools. We look at overall growth and overall enrollment in a general region.
What happens when a kid goes through stability transfer in elementary and completes the terminal grade? How does enrollment for middle school work?
Okay, cool. Great question. So as their student moves into 6th grade, then whatever the base assigned school for your address is for middle school would then become the default assignment for the student. And if you are fine with that, that's great. They roll forward, go on into 6th grade at the school for your address. Just like any other family and any other situation, if you are interested in a different school than your assigned school, you would have a couple of ways to ask for a change. One would be through the magnet application process, and that actually will start for us this year very soon, in the next couple of weeks. Our magnet application process allows you to ask for a seat at any of the identified magnet schools for your address at elementary, middle, and high school levels. As your students age forward, there also are added options for leadership academies and early colleges as your students get a little bit older. And so all of those could be asked for during that magnet application period. That is run as a lottery. So you get a seat or you don't based on the prioritized lottery system. If you don't get a seat, then you could be placed on a wait list for your top choice school. The other way to ask for a change in school assignment currently is through our request for transfer process. And that's where you can provide your individual reasons, your individual hardship concerns. Maybe you're trying to align calendars. We have a lot of families that maybe have before and after school care needs that they're trying to get resolved by a change in school assignment. Perhaps you've got an older student that's already at a different school and you just want the younger student to join them, that sibling match that we talked about earlier. So any of those really personalized reasons, you could use that request for transfer period evaluated to ask for that change in school assignment. But if you're happy with the one for your base, your rising 6th grade student would just be assigned to the base school for your address. Same is true for rising 9th, etc.
Where should I post my questions? I think this could be a thought exchange question.
Sure. So if you have questions that you want to make sure are presented for the board's consideration, as well as for staff to evaluate and include in the frequently asked questions section, I would really recommend you use the thought exchange. The hashtag session 4 is specifically so we can answer the questions right now. After today's session, you don't need to use that hashtag. If you'd like to, that's great. That would let us know that you are participating in tonight's session. But that hashtag was really just so that we could make sure that today during the session, we could identify those questions really quickly. So if you have general questions that you just want to make sure that are reviewed and received, we look through those. Our staff looks through those on a daily basis, multiple times throughout the day. As I mentioned, we've been running a lot of information sessions and reading through that. So we are looking to do sort of a big push update in the coming days based on all of the feedback and questions that we've received over the last 2 weeks. So we've been updating along the way, but we've got a bulk that have been ready to go. So you'll see a pretty significant update probably over the weekend.
Is there a chance that Oak Park will be included in the Bryan Road district for the second draft?
Again, as I mentioned earlier, it's a little too soon for me to be able to say what this planning team is going to consider because we're still reviewing all of the feedback that's been received. And we won't really be able to share much with the public until we get closer to that October 17th deadline. We want to make sure the board receives those recommendations first. So it's just a little too soon to be able to answer that question.
We have about 10 minutes left to the session. If you have any last questions to add, feel free to put them in the Q&A or in thought exchange. If you have any general questions for any other regions, go ahead and add them now.
I'm trying to think of questions that we received from while we're waiting for maybe a handful of new questions to come in. I did receive a lot of feedback that I've seen early on in the thought exchange. I want to speak out. I want to maybe do a public hearing, talk for a couple of minutes and share my thoughts with the board. How do I do that? The November 8th public hearing is the best opportunity to do that. Information on how to sign up and register to speak at that will be shared on our enrollment proposal website and probably our main website as well as we get closer to that date. So that would be a way to do that. But again, if you've got questions, comments, concerns, suggestions, put all of those in the thought exchange because that's where we're going on a regular basis as staff to constantly review, evaluate, and analyze what's coming in there.
Will there be a back and forth between drafts, change from first to second and then to final? I'm trying to understand.
Oh, okay. I think I understand the question. So by way of example, if something's in draft 1 and by draft 2 gets pulled out, could it be added back in for the final draft? No. If we have something in draft 1 and by the time we get to draft 2, if we pull it out, then it'll stay out. That's not to say it might not come back in a future enrollment plan in a future year, but for this year's plan, if anything were to be removed as a recommendation during draft 2, then it would stay out through the final review. We would not do the back and forth that you're describing because we do recognize that would be very destabilizing for families.
Would the board consider extending the stability rules to established residents who are just missing the window? This really hurts for those of us who have rising kindergartners and no older siblings who were set to attend Bryan Road.
I will say historically, we have not had any sort of future stability rules in the sense that if you've not already attended the school, being allowed to honor that as a stability request. That type of request would only be able to be processed through the regular transfer process. And so in that case, you could put in your request and your specific reasons, and based on space availability, we could evaluate those. I don't want to give false hope. Our ability in this particular area to approve transfers for non-stability students, meaning students who didn't already attend the school, will be limited just because, as we've talked about and as you've heard, there's a lot of residents in this area and there's a lot of growth in this area. But there would be a way to ask for it. It would just be through the regular transfer process. I just want to make sure you know that I couldn't guarantee that those would be approved. But if you have specific hardship reasons or concerns that you want to express, you certainly could do that.
What happens when Avisboro fills up? I don't see nearby schools in the pipeline next to Bryan Road.
Great question. For Aversboro, the recommendations that we're making based on the projections that we have as of today, the 10-year outlook is projected to be able to sustain the recommendations that we're making for a long period of time. The growth in that particular attendance area is not nearly as rapid or fast as what we're seeing in the Bryan Road area. So at this point, our projections show that it can hold these recommended adjustments for quite a long time.
For how many years will this new rezoning be valid after it's approved? Reassignment.
In an ideal state, once we make an assignment recommendation, it would stick, into perpetuity, but we do recognize that growth can occur. Residential development can get approved and change our outlook and change our projections and change, what's happening with our enrollments. So the most frequently that we can adjust an area is once every 3 years. That is not our goal. That is not our ideal. That is not what we want to do as staff or as a district. And certainly our board doesn't want to reassign families that frequently. However, in high growth areas that have rapid changes that are either unexpected or, just we're trying to manage as best we can, the most frequently we would ever change a reassignment is every 3 years. In this area, for the examples we've talked about today, we don't foresee anything close to that happening.
A few last questions here before we wrap up. Can you make Aversboro a magnet school?
It's a great question. The magnet review process is a very specific process where we go through and evaluate all of our campuses every year to determine whether or not they should have a change in their magnet theme for existing magnet schools or whether or not they should be included in the magnet program. And so that evaluation process is very rigorous. So I personally can't say yes or no whether or not Aversboro would ever qualify as a future magnet, but that is a process that happens on an annual basis with our magnet team, and they do evaluate all of our campuses. So I'll speak out of turn. So I can't say yes or no if it would ever be included in a magnet program, but do know that all of our schools are evaluated on an annual basis to determine if they would meet the magnet criteria and objectives.
I have 2 more, Susan.
Okay.
We can wrap up. My child goes to Alston Ridge due to year-round application. Does he qualify for the stability rule?
In just a moment, I'm going to show you all my email address. I think you probably should email me so that I can look up the specifics of your situation. So I hope you're still on the call. And so I'll just be honest with that. Sometimes with individual family circumstances, I sort of given away the secret. We recognize that sometimes an open forum like this isn't the best way to ask your personal individual question about you and your family. So if you do have a question like that, in just a moment, I'm going to give you my email address, and either I or one of my staff members will reach out to you as quickly as we can in the next couple of days to help respond to that question. But I'm going to ask you to be cautious with it. It's not for public comment. That really needs to go in the thought exchange. But if you want to ask a very, very specific and personal, detailed question about your family, we certainly are here to help with that.
If Bryan Road is not made a year-round school, would those in Oak Park be given a year-round option?
So the way that the calendar application options work today is when you look in the address lookup tool, if you see that there is a calendar option that comes with transportation, I would caution you to look at the draft lookup to see if there's still one being recommended for your area. If you don't see one recommended for your area or listed for your area, all that means is there's not an option that comes with district transportation. So you certainly could still ask for a year-round calendar, absolutely, using the normal request for transfer process, explaining why you want the year-round, and then you can choose any year-round campus, ask for any year-round campus that would meet your family's needs, to which you could provide district transportation, and we're happy to evaluate those on a case-by-case basis. As a reminder, I think I said board policy 4150 in the outset is what governs the policy or governs our assignment planning process. It also contains all of the rules for our transfer process. Okay. Looks like we've hit a lot of our questions. So I thank you so much for your participation. I really want to thank our host, Corrali, for managing our question bank, and our moderators. Oh my goodness, I know you were working feverishly to make sure we captured all of our questions. Those of you that have been on the line that might have that personal question that is probably not appropriate for an open forum, please use my email address and send that question directly to me. And as I mentioned, either I or one of my staff will respond to you as quickly as we can to help you answer that question. And just one final reminder, we'll be back at the board on October 17th. Please check back to the website frequently, particularly maybe Monday of next week. You'll see a lot of updates to our frequently asked questions section. Y otra vez, si necesita ayuda en español, por favor, envíe un correo electrónico a studentassignment@wcpss.net. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciated you being with us.
Have a good night. Thank you.